God is good.
All the time.
All the time.
God is good.
I have a question for you. Have you noticed that sometimes it's easier to be kind to people who you hardly know than the people in your own house? Have you noticed that you sometimes say things in anger to a sister or a brother or a child or a parent, and maybe even to a husband or a wife, that you would never say to a complete stranger? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? For the past few weeks, we've been reading from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. This is the sermon where Jesus tells us all that it really means to live the Christian life. And it's not easy. Jesus tells us to be peacemakers, to be kind, to be generous. And now today Jesus is telling us that sometimes anger can be almost like murder. What I think Jesus means is that I don't think Jesus is talking about the fact that we all feel angry sometimes. That's okay. I think Jesus is talking about the times that we sometimes get angry in a way that can really kill a relationship. And Jesus also says that if you have anything against anyone, before you come to this altar, before you come to God, you should go to that person, the person who you need forgiveness from, and you should ask for forgiveness. Now let me ask you, who is that person most likely to be? Somebody you met at Safeway? Or your husband? Or your wife? I think sometimes we think of the gospel as something that we do with everybody else. It's what we do with the rest of the world. But the fact is, the people who are closest to us are given to us for a very special reason. They're given to us because these are the people who we can really practice the gospel with. We can practice it with them because they're the ones that we can trust that when we make a mistake, they'll forgive us. The parent, the child, the sister, the brother, the wife, the husband. You know, many years ago, I encountered what I consider a really remarkable marriage. I'd like to tell you about it. But before I do, I have to warn you that I'm going to go back into some very difficult history for both the United States and the Philippines. Because I'm going to talk about a Japanese couple who were married just after World War II. And I know that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and so the United States felt violated. I also know that the Japanese invaded the Philippines. And that occupation was brutal and cruel. Many of us probably know men who fought in that war in the United States Army, and many of us know many people who fought the Japanese in the Philippine resistance, or remember what it was like during that time, or heard stories about it. But I also want to remind you that there were a lot of those Japanese soldiers that didn't join the army because they wanted to. They joined because they had no choice. And they would have much rather been home with their families. So this story starts in 1941 with a young woman by the name of Kazuko, who was 21 years old. And because she was 21, her parents decided that she was old enough to get married. And so as it was done in those days, they went to the matchmaker, who arranged a marriage with a man who she met 3 times. For an hour each. They were married, And then 1 week later, he was sent off to the army, to the Japanese army. And 3 weeks after that, Kazuko got a telegram saying that her husband of 1 week had been killed. After the war, she decided that maybe she should, her family actually decided that maybe she should marry again. So once more she went to the matchmaker. But what you should know is that in Japan, traditionally, if you've ever been married for any reason and want to be married again, you're considered damaged goods. There's really no chance. And so the matchmaker took one look at her and said, "What are you coming to me for? Why are you wasting my time? There have been so many men killed in this army. Right now, I have got 50 women for every one man who wants to get married. What chance do you think you have?" I'll tell you honestly, Kazuko, there isn't a man in this country who will marry you. She went home. You can imagine how she felt. The thing was that among the returning army was a young man named Seiji. He had been lucky enough not to be involved in any of the heavy fighting, and he came back unscathed, which was very lucky. What was unlucky was that he was the sixth son of a poor family. And what you need to know is that being the sixth son of a poor family meant that you had no money at all. That even in the best of circumstances, you were going to have a hard time getting married. But in this time, with Japan in absolute ruin, the chances are very slim at all. He went to the same matchmaker, who looked at him and said, "What are you wasting my time for? The sixth son of a poor family? I might as well have somebody come and marry someone and starve to death. It's against my conscience. I would never have anyone marry you. Don't waste my time. There isn't a woman in this country that I would ever want to have marry you." So Seiji went home, and you can imagine how he felt.